Well, I know what the date is today. It's the 16th of July,
Yes.
2009. We're at Calvin's house. When in doubt, go to the Ridge Road, and you'll always find a nice place to sit and chat. And Calvin and I have sat and chatted here on many occasions talking about wonderful books and whatever projects we happen to have in mind. Robbie Clark is with us today.
I am indeed.
The Lighthouse Man, not the White House Man. Although
yet.
that could be in the future.
Hey,
you never know,
You
Robbie.
never know.
We haven't actually talked to you on camera since the last time we interviewed your late dad. What a wonderful time we had. Boy, were those some memories in that last show we did?
Yes, it was a fabulous show. I'm so thankful that, we took the time and everything panned out because, as you know, in life, a lot of times things don't work out the way you'd like to, but that one did. So.
And several times before that at the various lighthouses that you're associated with and some that you're not.
Right.
So what's new in the lighthouse business?
Well, Gordy, we're keeping the lights lit, as you know, and they're working on possibly trying to do maybe Juniper Island Lighthouse, which
No
is
kidding.
possibly getting a light in that at some point. They did the one at the museum finally.
Yes.
And like I say, obviously it's just there so people can enjoy the light. It's not serving as an aid because it's in the museum. But it's nice that it's lit because it's kind of part of the trilogy or whatever you want to call it of the lighthouses. The fact that that's one more that's added to the to the 10 that were originally on the lake. And of course Crown Point will be the one for the quadricentennial in September when they have the big celebration down there. And I did get to go down with my dad last year and my mom, and we were there for the 150th anniversary at Crown Point, which was significant. So.
We have so much history around here, and a lot of the history is associated on and around Lake Champlain. Robbie's talking about the quadricentennial being celebrated in 2009, 400 years ago.
You're right.
Samuel Champlain went by and he said, "Look over there. Is that a house on the Ridge Road? Look at that lighthouse." So anyway, there are many lighthouses on Lake Champlain. Some are in operation now and some are not.
Right.
But we're here for a slightly different reason because Robbie here is a man of many interests. And if you can't tell from looking at these little objects around here on the table, he's very, very interested in space exploration.
Yes.
And that passion of yours, Robbie, started when you were a pretty little guy.
A little fella, yeah. I guess basically 40 years ago when I was 7, I had just turned 7, and of course Neil Armstrong was, 40 years ago today. They left at 9:32 this morning, or the morning of July 16th, 1969 rather. And like I say, it just it left that impression. And as you know, I talked about being at the lighthouse, and that was my moonship back then, and still is today in some ways. So.
Great memories. We had, I might mention at the outset here, and we still hope to interview him, a man by the name of Harlan Moulton that Calvin has met, who lives in the city of Plattsburgh, and we were all going to get together today, but he had
Yes.
a medical problem that demanded immediate attention, and we had to cancel that portion of it. But it would have been significant because he worked for NASA
Exactly.
for some time, a man who had great talent and interest, and it's always nice to meet somebody who is directly involved in the program. Hands-on experience.
Right.
So I imagine he's got some memories.
Exactly, and like I say, it's too bad because today I was hoping to tie in, like I say, my interest in what photos I had and be able to ask him a few questions because obviously there's always a lot of unknowns, and he might have just had one of those little pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that he could have added to our show today.
Calvin and I have said often, and we repeated it in the car yesterday off camera, every time we do a show we learn something. And even with your voracious appetite for this kind of information, there's always a lot to learn.
A tremendous amount.
You told me off camera that you've made many visits to Florida.
I have.
We finally made a launch last night, right?
We
After
certainly-
seven tries.
That's right, yes. And, there again, the weather is always a real issue anytime you launch a vehicle of that nature. And, when you're talking about men's lives, you want to be sure that the thing gets off, hopefully without a hitch. So, but it's significant that they launch from the same pad that we're talking about, Launch Complex 39A, which is where the Apollo 11 astronauts took off 40 years ago today. So,
It's what everything's connected.
Right.
To know those connections and follow them make it really interesting.
it does. And I also wanted to add, it's significant too because with my interest in the space program, I had a chance in 1975. My Aunt Erica, the one you met over at the lighthouse, her and her husband lived near Cape Canaveral.
No kidding.
And we got to go down. We went down on the train, my dad and my mom and I, on Amtrak, and had a wonderful trip because we were train buffs too, of course.
Oh, yeah.
And anyway, we got to see the last Apollo flight, which was the Apollo Soyuz, known as the Handshake in Space, and that took off on July 15th, which was yesterday, 34 years ago.
I love it.
So,
I love it.
yes.
When you were a little kid and all this was going on, you started making models
I did, yes.
out of wood, metal, both,
Both.
pieces of plastic.
I started off with a model of the Saturn V. I got a picture of it, and it was a plastic kit, and I think Revell made it at the time. And I was looking the other day, I was in a hobby store over in Burlington, and they had a model of a Saturn V, and I think it's been bought out by a different company. But anyway, this is the
On the bottom here?
yeah, on the bottom. Those I can.
Both of them?
Yeah, those are the two of the Saturn V, and it was just a plastic model kit, and there was no tower, no gantry, and so when I was, like I say, this is probably when I was about 10 years old that I built it, and when you're 10 years old, sometimes your modeling skills aren't the greatest. So
I don't know. I can see little men in there. Wow, that's amazing.
over the years, I took a little more time and I detailed it, did the painting and so forth, and then I went on to build what they call the Launcher and Biblical Tower, which really makes the model a real authentic type of thing. And anyway, you can see there's a shot here.
Which one, bottom or top?
The bottom.
Bottom right here, Calvin.
Kind of an overall of what I would call a model of the ICBM row as it was referred to at Cape Canaveral. And if you look off to Gordy's right, I have a model of what they call the Vehicle Assembly Building, and that's where the Saturn V's were all assembled. And then they were brought out on what they call a crawlerway and to the launch pad, or what is known as the hard stand, where the vehicle would sit and be fueled up when it's ready to be launched.
They call it a crawler for a good reason.
Yeah,
It doesn't do 30 miles an hour, I
No,
can promise you that.
1 mile an hour. And matter of fact, I think I got a nice picture of that, being that we're talking about it.
We got so much stuff here today. We're gonna have so much fun.
Here we go.
Wow.
There she is.
Look at the size of this thing.
1 mile an hour, I believe, like you say. It took them about 8 hours to go 3.5 miles.
Do they have more than one?
There's two of them, I believe. There was three of the launcher umbilical towers, because there was 4 bays in the vehicle assembly building. They could originally build up to 4, and I don't know why they wanted to do so many, but they built it to accommodate 4 Saturn V's that they could do at a time. And like I said, they only built 3 launcher umbilical towers, and I believe there's 2 of the crawlers. And those pads on there are 1 ton, each one of those pads, I believe, if memory serves.
Isn't that incredible?
It is.
We're recording this in a time when there's a lot of discussion about what the future of the space program is going to be.
Exactly. What is it going to be? And that's a big question mark, because, I always think back to Kennedy when he said, we choose to go to the moon, And
how many years ago he said that too, right? In one of his
61,
famous
I think,
speeches
right?
in 1961.
I think so, September '61, I believe. And but he set that precedent, and he just said, hey, we're going to do this thing before the decade's out, and they got it within 1 year. In '69, before the decade's out, of safely sending a man to the moon and returning him to Earth.
But we're hot and cold on, I mean, what you and I would like to see happen in space, and what we can afford, and what the
Right.
government in power
Exactly.
might want to do, and what NASA's plans are. At this point in time, the future's really unknown.
Very unknown, unfortunately, and I hope that they do at some point get to Mars, because that was kind of like the next on the list, And it was supposed to have happened by, I think 1999 was originally the time frame, they had set back in the 60s. And here we are, 10 years out, and it's nowhere near coming close to happening. But who knows, maybe somehow, they'll get going back to reestablishing a base on the moon. And from there, maybe they can work up something and develop a new vehicle to because going to Mars, obviously, we're talking a whole year one way. Going to the moon was a 3-day event, roughly, one way.
It's almost like going west in the olden days. Talk about frontiers, Calvin. We're all interested in westerns, as we called it. But the western frontier of our country is it pushed west, and the wagon trains and the prospecting for gold later on and all the other things. And now we're talking about a different kind of frontier.
Right. The final frontier.
The final frontier. And I know you're a Star Trek fan, too.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
That started with the first episode. You must have been in heaven.
Well, yeah, actually, I was a little too young to really appreciate it. So I was more lost in space because...
and that was a great show, too.
It was.
An entirely different plane.
Well, yeah, but what was good about Lost in Space is that it was more for children. You know what I'm saying?
That's why I liked it. I was an adult with a child's mind.
And there again, here's another interesting tie-in with Plattsburgh. As you may recall, Michael Anderson, the Columbia astronaut, was born in Plattsburgh and was a great lover of Star Trek and Lost in Space. And, like I said, here he is, passed on before, he would have been 50 years old, I believe, this coming Christmas. I think that was his birthday. And, but, it's interesting to know that he, like I say, was born right in Plattsburgh, and so here I am in Champlain. So even though I'm not an astronaut, there's still that, what I'm saying, that connection with this area.
There have been other connections as well with Plattsburgh, and that makes it very, very interesting.
Yes.
I want to mention before we go any farther that Calvin made a rather amazing discovery this morning through the Associated Press. He learned that thousands of feet of 16 millimeter footage of the early space launches, right, Calvin?
The stuff to do with 40 years ago has been enhanced.
With 40 years ago has been enhanced and is now available on the web.
Right.
And from time to time, perhaps we can show some of that footage as a part of this program.
Yes.
You haven't seen all of it.
Oh my God, no. There was a nice documentary that they did. I think it was in '94 for the 25th anniversary, which I taped on. I think it was on educational TV at the time, and it was Apollo 11 as it happened, and that is quite intriguing too. But I think this is different than what I'm talking about. Entirely different format, and like you say, it's the actual photos. As this was a show that was done where they had people. I think Jules Bergman, one of the ABC reporters back at that time, and trying to think of the other ABC reporter. Who would that have been?
You're asking me? I can't remember what I had for breakfast.
Yeah, I'm trying to think who it was. But anyway, they did the show, and they talked about, talked to the astronauts before they took off and so forth. But obviously the internet wasn't that up and coming back then. But I'm sure that this footage is going to be very, very, very interesting.
We're talking with Robbie Clark, a friend of ours for a long, long time, as was his dad and mom and so many other people who've been around here for a little while here in the North Country. How many models? Where's the late Ron Venn when we need him? Did you ever meet Ron?
No, unfortunately, but I saw the shows that you guys did, not in its entirety, but I saw a lot of it, and he seemed to be just a fantastic model builder.
Oh my goodness!
And
Resourceful. I'm sure
but.
he wouldn't, but he did it a lot, and he was ingenious and resourceful, and that's what pleased us because he would find if he needed something.
Right.
He would think in his mind, where can I get that, or where can I manufacture that?
Right.
And he would do it, and it would look real. And I'm sure when you were putting your models together, you were saying, how can I make that look real?
That's it.
Did you use stuff all around the house?
I did, yeah. As a matter of fact, I've got some other pictures. You guys have been out in the machine shop, so you asked about some of the materials. And so what I did is I ended up building out of aluminum. If you want to hold this up.
Which one? This one?
Yeah, actually, the both of them. They're both
of these on the bottom.
Yeah. This is the actual one of the actual atlases. This is down in the what they call the Rocket Garden at Cape Canaveral at the Visitor Center, and it was one of the unused Atlas Ds that launched John Glenn back in 1962, and. Being that's the year I was born, I was always intrigued by that, that year and that particular vehicle. So one of my first models that I did on my own from scratch was this one here of the Atlas and the gantry at Launch Complex 14.
Yeah.
And
wow.
the like I said, the rocket itself is all aluminum. It all comes apart. The escape tower, the capsule, is what they call a stage-and-a-half rocket. The gantry itself was all made out of toothpicks, wood,
Come
and
on,
cardboard.
Robbie, toothpicks.
Right, and if you look here on the bottom, these two rods, those are a couple of brazing rods from out in the shop for the tramway for the rail for the gantry. So
and did you really pay attention to scale?
I did. That Saturn V is what they call 1/144th scale. 1 inch is equivalent to 12 feet. So I kept the same scale so I could keep everything in that same gist.
Wow.
Yeah.
So even when you were a little kid making models, you paid attention to scale?
Well, like I said, my interest started when I was, roughly 7 years old.
Right.
And obviously I didn't have the skill, the knowledge, the wherewithal. But as time went on, so this is about 82, 83, I had developed enough abilities that I could really start doing some serious things. But I had the dream to do it. And like I said, in the meantime, I was gathering pictures and information. And like I say, this is long before the internet, so you couldn't just go type in Launch Complex 14 and come up with a picture and a whole bunch of specs on it. I had to go and I had to do a lot of telephoning and a lot of correspondence via snail mail, as you guys call it today. And I got a hold of some people down in Florida called Reynolds Smith and Hills, and they were in Merritt Island. And they were the architectural firm that did all the launcher and biblical tower for the Saturn V, for the Apollo 11 that we're talking about specifically today. They built all that. They didn't build it, but they did all the architectural work for the people who built it. So, like I said, and they were able to send me some drawings. So I have some drawings and so forth. And like I said, that was really helpful because before I was using pictures. And I would just try to, size things up, and it was difficult, because pictures, you can't get the proportions sometimes,
I wonder, does anybody in NASA today know about your collection of models?
Well, back in '88, I was down at the Cape, and I met some of the, not the real up officials, but some of the middle class or whatever officials. I don't know how you want to describe them. And I showed him some of my pictures, and they weren't too complimentary. The guy says to me, he says, your clouds are upside down.
Oh, come on.
I felt like saying, give me a break, fella. But I didn't.
He said your clouds are upside down?
He said my clouds are upside down. You think he would say, well, that's a pretty decent model, fella. But
that only Ozzie Sweet and him would know that the clouds are upside down. I
And,
wouldn't know that until you just said it. They looked like very nice clouds.
I thought they were pretty decent. I was happy with them. But anyway,
I think that's beautiful. I got to remember that.
what happened was
That's not a compliment at all. Your clouds are upside
it's
down.
It's not. But what my goal was, Gordy, is I wanted to try to, and I'd still like to do it today, is to me it would make a really nice display down there, and it wouldn't take but this in my basement's like 17 feet of area. So they could do something down there. I'm sure they could find 20-some feet somewhere in that big complex down there that they could put models so that when children or even adults, anybody could come in and see what Cape Canaveral would have looked like, and get some idea of the whole gist of the history there. Because, like I say, there's a really rich history of American rocketry with Robert Goddard and Werner von Braun. And, to see what these guys did, because it's really, truly amazing. And you use the word passion so many times in the show, and these guys had such a passion. And we're talking about the future. We've got to somehow, and I don't know how, incorporate this into people's heads so that they can get this spark so that we can keep moving forward and make our program, what it should be.
How many models do you have?
Oh God! Well, you can
Did
count
you
them
count
there. About a dozen of them that on this area here, and of course I've got some other
I just
static
wondered
displays.
Oh, I see.
You know what
I
I'm
just
saying?
wondered how mobile it would be. I mean, it would seem to me like on this occasion or other occasions when you could get them somewhere in the Legion or the VFW or somewhere.
Yeah. They're very fragile. They're they're very delicate. You know what I'm saying? And it just, you'd have to have a way of transporting them without having things all broken up.
Yeah. Well, that would be a nice dream come true if they would set up a little corner for you. I imagine other people have made models.
Oh, they have, and they had professional
And there
models.
are commercial models, as you can easily see. We got them all over the table here.
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
And so when did you start collecting these?
Well, these in the last about the last 15 years or so, Hallmark ornaments. They do a whole series of ornaments. They do sporting ones. They do.
These would be not Christmas tree ornaments, but just regular.
Actually, yeah. If you look closely, there's a little hook on there.
Of course,
They're made.
There's a hook in the middle.
They're all made to be hung off the tree, really, and they just
Interesting.
have.
Can you imagine doing a whole tree with? Why not?
Yeah.
I've got a whole bunch of Snoopy ornaments when they first came out.
Okay.
Enough to do a whole tree. Why not?
Yeah.
NASA.
That's it. Yeah.
So how many are there all told?
Well, there's the four basic ones. There's the lunar module itself, and I brought of course the lunar rover, which wasn't used on Apollo 11. It wasn't used till I think it was on Apollo 15 was the first time it was ever used. And then there's this one over here, which is John Glenn's Mercury Friendship 7. They were all 7 because of the original 7 astronauts.
Sure.
Friendship 7. Freedom 7 was Alan Shepard's on this rocket here, on the little Mercury Redstone. The little Mercury Redstone, and if you now, obviously, the scale is not the same, but if you look here, this capsule here and this capsule are the same capsule. They're both a one-man Mercury capsule, and here you can see the escape tower on this particular one.
This capsule, is that the Smithsonian?
I'm trying to remember. I know I was out in San Diego, and the Apollo 9 capsule is out there at their in Balboa Park, and I think Apollo 11 is at Smithsonian, and I think
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've been right up and touched it.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. Like I said, I lose track sometimes of where some of these exhibits are.
Some of these make sounds. Can we do that? I'd like to see if the microphone can pick some of this up.
Let's see what we can do. Why don't we start with this being fitting that this is the first. This is Alan Shepard. This is a model of his vehicle.
Let's get it over where next to the microphone, which is right there.
All right.
And let's see what we can do, folks. Are you ready?
Let's see. I will have you.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
sound.
It is. I think that's the actual sound
there,
bite.
there is no question in my mind about that. I love it.
Right, from May 5th,
You
19...
notice how the light got a little brighter when it launched?
Yes, I know.
All right,
I know.
what do you want to do next?
Why don't we do this right here?
Okay.
This would be the next thing that would have happened. There was two flights of that particular rocket, which is the Redstone, the Mercury Redstone, and then they went to the Atlas. This I want to point out, this was only a suborbital.
Yes.
When Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom flew, they were only an arc. In other words, they made an arc. They didn't have enough power in that booster to achieve Earth velocity or Earth orbit. So when John Glenn finally flew in 1962 and became the first American, as you know, Yuri Gagarin beat us the previous year in April of '61 on his I think it was a Vostok rocket. But anyway, this particular Mercury capsule was flown on that little model I showed you there. And as a matter of fact, I have. Why don't we just take a second, and I'll just show you a couple of the actual pictures from NASA that I got that were of the Atlas, of John Glenn's Atlas taking off. Okay, this.
All right, tell me what it is, Rob.
Yeah, this is John Glenn's February 20th, 1962 Atlas taking off. And this particular picture here is still on the launch pad, sitting on the pad at Launch Complex 14. And then we're going to play for you, hopefully here, a soundbite.
Not hopefully, it's going to happen. Murphy's Law doesn't
Murphy's
apply
Law.
at Calvin's house.
Yeah.
Roger, 0K, and I feel fine. Capsule is turning around. Oh, that view is tremendous.
Of course it is. We know it's tremendous. How many times have we heard that
Oh,
line,
my
huh?
God. Well, yeah, but you can just imagine, what it really was like.
When you think of the technology that was required to make these kinds of launches and how long ago it was,
I know.
you can marvel at it.
Yeah, because it was the true infancy of the space program, the very, very beginnings.
We can understand how you have. I'm sure you aren't the only one.
Oh.
Is there a club of aficionados?
I'm sure there is.
And you're not in it? Come on, Robbie.
I know. I should be, shouldn't I?
You're a lone wolf anyway.
Always
you do
have been, yes.
I love it. What else? You want to make some of these others make noises?
Yeah,
Which one do you want to go
We
with?
can go. Why don't we go to? Like I said, I'm trying to do it in order of when they took place in the space program.
Okay.
Why don't we go to Neil Armstrong, since our program's focusing on the 40th anniversary?
Sure.
This little one here, there's a little plaque. I'm sure Calvin can't make it out, but this is commemorating in 1994 the 25th anniversary, and there again, this is a hallmark ornament.
But they're pretty realistic,
They
boy.
really are. They're just a nice little collectible thing, and nice for guys like me that like this sort of thing.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Those lines have been paraphrased
Oh
and
my
repeated
God, I know.
tens of thousands of times.
On that show that I was watching, they had asked Neil Armstrong, being that it was such a momentous occasion, if he had any thoughts, and I'm sure he did, but he didn't reveal them at that time. But I wonder how he really did finally come up with that line, because it's really quite the line,
Just absolutely wonderful,
Yes,
and it's
yes,
an iconic phrase.
absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely.
That's great to have these ornaments that speak to us.
They do. And
Next.
so we'll go to the lunar module itself, and the recording you hear is going to be Apollo 14. But the whole idea is that the view that's the same. The lunar module was the same on all the missions, right along. So it's fitting for what we're doing here today.
I know we just picked a clear day to arrive. There's not much haze in the air at all. Incredible. Really a wild place up here.
It's really a wild place up here.
Magnificent desolation, as Buzz Aldrin said.
To risk of being mundane, I want to point out that You've seen interviews with all these astronauts over and over again, as I have, with great pleasure and interest. And I'm always excited to learn what makes people tick down deep.
Mm,
What kinds of life-changing experiences have we all had
Right.
that laid the foundation for what happens to us today and tomorrow? And how many of these astronauts came back and sat down in front of a microphone and say, I am changed
yeah.
forever
Oh,
based on what I've done?
oh my God, yeah. I
Especially
mean,
the first guys looking back.
especially very difficult for him. I know Buzz Aldrin had a lot of issues, personal issues, as you know. And you know, I mean, once you've been to the moon and back, I mean, how do you top that one? You know, I mean,
Yeah, what else is there?
what are you gonna do next?
You want to pick up a quart of milk? You gotta be kidding me.
Yeah, give me a break. I'm an astronaut, not a milk carrier.
But it's true.
It is
It's
very true.
You
It's
know,
very
you
true.
get
Absolutely.
you get a different perspective when you look down from the observation tower of the Empire State Building,
Right.
or now that it's reopened, when you go up into the torch
At
of
the Statue of-
Miss Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, and look down.
I know.
As a matter of fact, I can tell you that my perspective changed when they were going full tilt to rehab the Statue of Liberty,
Hmm.
and we flew over it.
Did you really?
And the very astute pilot dipped the wings enough so we could get a real good view.
Yeah, that was quite a
And,
project.
You know, your heart skips
Yes.
a beat.
Yes, absolutely.
So I can imagine what it was like for these folks.
Oh yeah, like you said, you can just envision it, but we didn't actually. We weren't, like you said, we got a good idea of what it's like. But boy, this book that I have from Mike Collins, he talks about that. Like
Let's hold it up and talk about it. Go ahead, tell me
there's-
about it.
There's been, like he said, there's been volumes and volumes of things written about the mission that he was on, and like you said, until you actually read his book, you can't really fully appreciate it unless it actually happens to you. You know what I'm saying? And
All of us can't write a book and get it forwarded by Charles A. Lindbergh. Either
yes,
can we.
I know.
And Mike, it's an interesting story how you came to meet up with this guy. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, like I said, the year was 1976, and lo and behold, there again in Plattsburgh, at the Sherwin-Williams, no less.
Of course.
And they needed somebody to do the grand opening, and who better than Mike Collins if you could get him, right? And so Mike came up on a KC-135, as I recall, when the Air Force was still going down
Our
Plattsburgh.
beloved tankers.
He came up, and like I said, I had the good opportunity to meet him and talk with him, and excuse the pun, but he's a really down-to-earth kind of guy.
Oh, I love it. We have to show the autograph because I think it's significant. So you heard he was going to be there, and
Right. I think the press Republican had done a little write up that he was going to be there. I forget exactly because as you know it's a couple of years ago. But anyway, I got down there and he was very gracious and spent time and answered my questions. And here's a picture of that day.
the top.
Yeah, the top.
Oh, look at we know what kind of photograph it was too. Look
Yeah,
at this.
that tells
What?
the time frame. The old Polaroid.
Boy, oh boy, when you think about the history of Polaroid alone and how
Well, listen to this. We went to Kmart the other day to buy some 35 millimeter film. You can't even get it anymore.
Oh, well, of course. This goes to show you everything
That's right.
goes around
That's
now.
right.
Of course, we're in a digital age.
Yes, exactly. And anyway, like I said, I had the chance to talk with him and ask him some different questions. And I remember some of the things he said. He was very green, as we call him today. He wanted to, he said the cars are way too big. He said we got to have smaller, more efficient cars. And this is back in '76.
Is that a voice of prophecy?
Yeah.
When
And,
we were all hoping for bigger and bigger muscle cars.
yeah. See what I do
Actually,
with it.
those that was pretty green era though in the '70s when I call them my Mother Earth days.
Right.
We're all trying to make our carbon footprint a little bit smaller.
That's exactly right. Where the devil is that? I just had it here a second ago. Oh.
All right, and
Yeah, and that's just the one of the photos. If you look closely, you can see it was sitting there, and he was autographing the book, and he actually in the picture too. So I got my full autograph session. But it was really nice because today I know that Neil Armstrong, I think, and I think Buzz Aldrin, they have sometimes have gone to some of these big meets, and you pay several $100s to get to see them. So this one didn't cost me a cent, so I lucked out.
We haven't really spent a lot of. I don't think we've done a special program dedicated to autographs, have we, Calvin? But it's a good idea sometime to speak to, to make our own little Antiques Roadshow right here at this table or somewhere else, because Calvin likes autographs. I like autographs.
Yeah.
Most of the autographs I've received were almost inadvertent, I'd be interviewing somebody on the radio who was passing through town, or I would play a first record by an artist, let's say in the early 1960s.
Yes.
People who went on to be massive mega stars.
Big time.
But, they would send you a personal note and saying, I made a record, would you care to play it?
Yeah.
If so, I'll stop in on my way to Montreal and say hi.
Yeah.
And I did it many times. And now my wife will get into a drawer or a box and say, look at who sent you a note saying, thank you for playing my first record when nobody else would
That's it.
play it.
I know. Which is,
So those are important.
yeah, very important.
It's not just the autograph, but it's what the autograph means.
What it means. Yeah, that's right.
Do you have others from other astronauts?
No, that's the only astronaut that I've met.
Oh,
so.
well, we got to get you out. We got to
Yeah.
get you in the loop.
Yes.
Well, this program, the space program, I think many of our viewers to this this edition of Our Little Corner know about the program in fits and starts as they see a blurb, or they see today there'll be memorabilia,
Right.
there'll be old news clips and stuff, and then it kind of goes out of their
Yeah.
of their vocabulary for
Right,
a while.
Right.
But it always stays in your vocabulary.
Yeah, well, like I said, it just somehow, and there again, we don't know all the wheres and why-fors, but it just somehow made a big impression on me, and I just had this, like you say, this passion for this whole thing, and, I just been intrigued by it.
Robbie, we're talking with Robbie Clark, by the way, at Calvin's house here. We all have our special interests.
Mm-hmm.
And special interests apply to politics,
Yeah, oh,
as
absolutely.
well as individuals
Yeah.
like Calvin and you and me.
Right.
And Calvin's always looking on the internet for something he's particularly interested in, either for his own personal use or for use on future programs like this.
Mm-hmm.
You have many interests.
I do have quite a few, yeah.
But is this one the broadest interest that you have, do you think?
Well, like I said, it goes back to the beginning, and this was my passion, and I really always wanted to be an astronaut, and I took all the subjects back in high school, like the calculus, the trig, the physics, and unfortunately my marks really weren't as good as they should have been to be material, to be involved with this program. And of course, as you know, my dad, when I got involved, we were doing things with the machine shop and working with the lighthouses, and that became my life at that point. But somewhere deep within has always been this yearning to still to have something to do with the space program, and we're doing it today. Like I say, we're allowing the viewers hopefully to share some of my limited knowledge of the space program, and hopefully being able to enjoy some of the things that have brought me a lot of pleasure over the years.
Well, you're a fan. I mean, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
You're a huge fan of the program and
Yeah.
all the people involved with it.
Yeah.
And you must just peruse the papers to see if there's somebody going to be on television with an interview
Yeah.
or this series of information
Yeah.
that came from NASA
Yeah.
of the old 16 millimeter stuff,
Right.
which many people have either not seen before because they're maybe too young to remember,
Mm-hmm.
but have never seen it enhanced like this.
Right.
And many of these old 16 millimeter films can be enhanced to the point when they're digitalized that
Right.
fill in the blanks, so to speak, so they look
Right.
better.
It's interesting that you mention that, because I do have, not in 16 millimeter, but it was converted to 8 millimeter. It's called Movie Newsreels. It was out in California, and I have a 400-foot reel of Apollo 11. Of course, there's no audio, strictly a video or visual, And I used to play that over and over again on the old 8mm projector and watch.
No kidding. Is that
yeah.
something you were able to buy?
Yes, I was able to buy, and I also bought a few on I think John Glenn's and some of the planetary missions like the one to Mars and Jupiter. The unmanned probes and stuff like that. And I'm sure they're probably still available, but like you say, everybody's now done things on DVDs and video and so forth. But back then there was as you know, just the 8 and 16 millimeters and stuff of that nature. That was that's what was at that time available.
What we're talking about here today involves a lot of avenues of thought, and it involves theology, it involves philosophy, and it involves a yearning, I think, for all human beings to be told or to determine whether we are alone.
Well, that's right. Yes.
And I'm sure that thought has fascinated you, hasn't it?
Yes, and my dad as well. We used to always talk about with the possibility of
what do they look like? What do they
extraterrestrial life,
feel like? Take
know.
me to your leader.
Yeah.
Well, it dates back to my very early childhood when, a long time ago, a gentleman who was a powerful force in Hollywood and in radio back then, Orson Welles, did a program called The War of the Worlds.
Exactly.
And ran it on the eve of Halloween and and really disrupted life as we know it, and because people believed,
that it was
that
really
the aliens had landed in New Jersey, and there they were.
it was a very powerful show that he did, and there again, no visual, all audio. So people used their imaginations, gathered around the radios, and listened to these shows, and were enthralled by the potential of like you said.
The early television shows, Lost in Space was fun, and that was a little hokey. But if you think that was hokey, we used to listen to a lot of the space type programs on the radio.
Yes.
Before television ever came along, and some of the shows, that early space-oriented shows on television, were done in sets that were no more complicated than Calvin's living room here
That's
on the
right.
Ridge Road in Champlain.
Yeah.
And so by today's standards, they are so hokey.
I know.
But the kids like you and me, wow, Flash Gordon and all these guys,
I know.
That's great.
It is great. It really is.
So you were brought up on that, but in a much, much later time period than I was.
Right.
Have you got any other good pictures or anything that we'd like to talk about today?
I have a lot of them. Like I said, I had to contact, when I was building these models, I had to contact people that were in NASA. So these are official NASA photographs, and this is of Gemini 5, and it's some really good shots. I also have a color of that too.
Wow. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you can, imagine the emotion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It truly
not
is.
Not only our emotion in watching it, but the guys who are sitting in there, right?
That's right. I know.
Oh, wow.
There's a nice,
look at this.
Well, what was nice back, this is the old Eckerd drug store down in Florida.
Oh,
had postcards.
yeah.
This is 1975, and I went in and I bought a whole bunch of them. Thank God, because I don't know how you'd get them today.
Oh, see that?
But
postcards themselves are gems. Are you kidding me? Look at this.
There's a John Glenn's, and you can see the gantry's a little different. It's got the red and white pattern.
It certainly is.
I think that was probably some of the early test days of that particular one.
Well, we were there in the late 80s, and I'm sure somewhere in a drawer we've got lots of postcards too. What's this?
This is Patrick Air Force Base. This is down when you're on your way to Cape Canaveral.
Sure.
And those are not models, but actual unused launch vehicles in some of the early days of Cape Canaveral. And you can see, if you look over here, the one with the red, that's what they call a Titan 1.
Oh yeah, right.
This picture that I showed you,
where my little finger is over here with the red one, that's the Titan 1.
Right, this one right here is a Titan 1.
Oh wow.
And the Beaumark and some of that, what they call the skid strip on the early days when they were, back in the 50s when they were testing out, because what we got to bring to mind to the viewer is that this was very dangerous business. There was several launches that had to take place before they could successfully launch a man safely. And there was a lot of them that got blown up, as you probably remember.
Oh, very well.
And so anyway, there was a Titan 1, and of course this was the one that they used to fly the Titan 2. Now, the reason why I'm showing these is significant because the capsule that Mike Collins, the astronaut whom I met, flew in was the Gemini 10 before Apollo 11. He had to train, and when they went from Mercury to the they went from a one-man capsule to the two-man capsule. So here's the two-man capsule, and this is what Mike Collins would have been in when he flew. These little doors open up to reveal the astronauts inside.
Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can also see this is what in the back, all the different fuel tanks and so forth.
Sure.
That would have, that was their life support.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, of course, from there they developed the Apollo moon capsule, and that was a three-man, as you recall, vehicle, and it was referred to as a CSM, which is short for Command Service Module. And of course, it's really amazing because let's go to this picture this is an actual photo of Apollo 11, and these I want to mention too. These are significant, these photos, because this is what they call the mobile service structure, and this went on that big crawler. That was what the second ones was used for, to bring it up so that it would give them 360-degree access to the vehicle, because there was an awful lot of stuff that had to be serviced on that thing before it could fly. You had what they call the Ullage motors that go on the side. Those would shake the propellant down as the thing took off. They had to keep shaking the propellant down, otherwise it would go back up, because the first stage burned what they call RP1, which was kerosene and liquid oxygen. And then the upper stages were both liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen at 200 some below zero. And like Mike Collins says in his book, it's amazing that at those 200 and 300 some degree below zero, that things would come together and you'd have a 4,000 degree fire when it was just way below 0 seconds before,
It's incredible. Like I said, the technology even then was astounding.
But what's so amazing about, you have a roughly 363-foot Saturn V rocket with 3 stages, and the only thing that comes back is this little capsule. This little tiny capsule, roughly 11 feet in diameter and 12, 13 feet tall. This little thing is all that's going to come back out of that gigantic rocket,
It's very interesting because I'm sure that the average layman doesn't fully understand what happens to all this stuff when it goes up into space, what comes back. As it turns out, there are a lot of things floating around up there.
There's
Robbie.
a lot of stuff out there, yeah, there really is.
And it doesn't take very big particles to do damage, so we have to consider that every time we put something up there.
That's right. It is.
Excuse me.
And another thing too, there were so many unknowns when they went on Apollo 11. You take, for instance, on this lunar module, the model doesn't have it, but the real lunar module would have had 4 big long spikes, probably a good 2 feet long on each one of these pads. I don't know if you ever knew that.
No, I did
Because
not.
they were afraid that it was going to be so much dust that the thing would sink down, and they wanted to be darn sure that they didn't bury themselves in a big dust ball. So that was one of the things that was, something that they had to consider.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I learned something.
There's an awful lot of unknowns, and of course this acted as both a launch pad and a lander. The what they call the descent stage would come down on the 4 pads, and then when they would lift off, it would separate right at this point right here, and the ascent stage with the 2 men would go back up into meet the command service module with up in the moon's orbit. And maybe I can tip this for Calvin. You can see the detail. This became a really big issue on Apollo 13 because this is where the explosion took place in this unit right here.
Tragically.
caused the men to just barely get back. And I always think of Gene Krantz, his slogan, which is I think is really a fantastic one, and that is failure is not an option. How fitting, because though they really worked to get those men back. I mean, they did everything they could.
I'm not sure everybody realizes how close that was.
Exactly, and like you say, the stories have been told and retold many times, and it's one worthy of retelling. That's for sure.
What do you say we pause a minute, collect our thoughts, and see what we want to do next?
That
Stay
sounds
tuned.
good.
Oh, we had a nice pause for a minute. We
Yeah.
chatted about things, and now we're going to show you some stuff. What's this one?
This is when we went in 2003, my last time at Cape Canaveral. My dad and Admiral Bowman, our friend from the Coast Guard, and a couple of Coast Guardsmen were down there, and we went to the lighthouse, and we got to meet the director of what they call the skid strip down there, and he gave us a little commemorative coin for the 45th Space Wing, which was originally the Eastern Test Range, and it's now called the 45th Space Wing. And that's just a little commemorative coin.
We want our audience to know, Robbie, that that lighthouse is not on the general tour.
Boy, say that again.
So you had to pull some very serious strings to get in there, and we're delighted that you did, because it adds to that lifetime of great memories.
It does. And you know, I had my video camera with me, and my dad had the still camera. And like a fool, I never took the pictures with the still camera. I wish to heck, you know what I'm
No
saying?
kidding.
I was just so wrapped up,
Oh,
into the thing that, so by the time I got down, I took some pictures. And matter of fact, we can look
Yeah,
at.
I want to look at this
Okay,
first of all.
all right.
This is a neat souvenir.
Yeah, that's the Apollo 11 commemorative coin, and it's got today's date on it in 2000, or not July 16, 1969 rather, and then the actual landing date, the 20th.
Significant because this is the date
Right.
that the reason we're sitting here. Calvin loves to do things on the exact date.
Yeah,
And we've done that before, and it has great meaning,
it does.
especially in the future when these programs are shown again and again and again.
Right.
We've shown the top picture. Now this bottom picture with the capsule, explain
Right.
what that is.
All right, now this is down at Cape Canaveral. They dismantled what they call the launcher and biblical towers, and this is what they call the number 9 swing arm,
Right.
and it contained what is known as the White Room, which you'll see on this side.
Well, we're looking at that one.
Oh,
He's got it fixed on there,
okay,
so you
all
can
right.
explain it.
Anyway, the White Room was supposedly called that because it was germ-free, and the astronauts, before they got into their capsule and they closed the hatch, they had to make sure that hopefully no germs were brought on board with them.
And that's the white
And
room.
that's
Here's
called the
close-up
White Room.
picture of the white
Yeah,
room on the top.
Yeah, the last place on Earth, they also refer to it as.
Oh, is that neat?
Yes.
I'm sure a lot of great lines have come from space already.
Yes.
Oh, that's neat. All right, as we go along, we'll just spend a few moments on these.
Right.
Tell people what they are. Calvin fixes them on the screen so we
Right.
can see.
Which one?
Looking at the
Right.
top one.
The top one shows the command service module and the escape tower, and also the shroud where the lunar module would have been housed. And the bottom picture shows
All right, let's get the bottom one.
shows further down the whole Saturn V in its entirety, and you can see the third stage at the top, the second stage in the middle, and the first stage way down at the bottom.
And you mentioned that these were outside for some time.
Yes,
And with that salt air at Cape Canaveral, we know that it would be much better to get them inside. So what did they do? Build a building for them?
They did build a building. Let me just quickly show. There's a postcard of it outside, and they built a building. I'm trying to remember exact year. Oh, I don't know, around 2000 or so. When we were there in 2003, it was up and running, and it's really a nice building to go into. And you go in there, and they have the whole rocket in there. First you go in, and they have the replay of the launch of Apollo 8, which was the first mission to the moon,
Right.
just to orbit the moon,
Yes.
which happened in 1968 at Christmas time. And they have that actual launch replay. You get to sit just like you were in the Launch Control Center, which is right next to the Vehicle Assembly Building. And as you know, when that Saturn V clears the tower, the top of the tower,
Yeah.
then everything goes to Houston, and Houston Mission Control takes over, and the Launch Control Center ceases to be in control of the flight. So anyway, well, like I said, if you can stop a second, I can just get trying to
Yeah,
find
let's
that.
pause.
I wanna-
All right, that's the building, Robbie.
Right, where the Saturn V that was outdoors is now inside, protected from the weather, and can be seen year-round. Like I said, they can be a rainy day and people can still enjoy it, and it's not deteriorating the historic
It's hard
value.
to tell on television how big these things are, but if you look at this picture and see the tiny little people.
I know. It's just, like I said, it's just so amazing, to see this vehicle. And that's the joy. I encourage anybody that ever has a chance to go
You
down.
can look at both of these pictures. It's more of the same, but closer,
Right.
close up.
Right. The top one shows the second stage engines, the J2 engines, and the bottom is the F1, the big 12.5 foot in diameter 5 engines in the cluster that they used to launch on the first stage. You don't realize, like I say, you talk about 3 men and the vehicle itself, the lunar module and the equipment, but we're talking a few thousand pounds, but all that thrust, millions of pounds of thrust to break the bounds of Earth, to get into orbit, and then to leave orbit and go to the moon is, it takes a lot of doing.
And we don't we don't even know yet what technology it will take. I mean, we can go pretty far into space right now, and
Right.
we've got some things that are on their way, don't we?
Yes, we do. We do. And like I said, they're constantly trying to. They're actually talking, the way I understand it, of trying to revisit some of the old Apollo hardware and incorporate it into the newer type of launch systems that they can use to go back to the moon, and from there hopefully to Mars. But like I say, it's still in the works. So.
But we've got probes that are going way, way, way out into space, and we hope to be able to get to the edge of the Milky Way because,
That's it.
most of us I'm speaking for myself now, are not sophisticated enough to understand what it must be like beyond the Milky Way.
Right.
But there are things beyond the Milky Way.
There's got to be.
And there are so many other galaxies.
I want to point out, you talked about space and time and so forth. What's always been really fascinating to me is when we look at the stars that we see, when we look up in the sky.
You're seeing something that happened.
But the whole thing is, Gordy, and I don't know if you've ever thought about this or read about it, but when you look out in space at the stars at night, you're looking back in time, because some of those stars that you see may not even be there anymore.
That's exactly
And
right.
we're seeing the light as it's coming to us just now. But it probably could have winked out years before that,
There is nobody that is more fascinated by space and time than I am. And when you ask me if I've thought about it, I chuckled inside because it's been, I won't say it's occupied all of my thoughts, but it's occupied a great many of my thoughts since I was the age you were when the space program first started. And when you go back to study Einstein's theory of relativity and understand what great foresight that man had.
That's right.
To predict what happens to things when they travel at the speed of light. And then when we talk about light years.
Light years, I know.
And then you might be able to get an idea of what was happening. What you see in space ain't like looking across the road and seeing your grandfather approaching your driveway.
No, absolutely.
Isn't it? That's so
It is.
so amazing.
It is. And like you said, with Einstein, the fascinating thing about him is they said he only used 1/8 of his brain. Can you imagine?
He wasn't a very good student in school either, by the way.
It was like me.
All right, let's go and look at these a little bit at a time. Which
Right.
one? The top one?
You have to. I think we've looked at that one. That's the Atlas.
we have?
That's the Atlas.
Oh, okay.
Why don't we just quickly shoot this, and I'll put it back in the album here.
Okay.
That's the vehicle
The
assembly
top one?
building. Yeah, actually, you can see the top of the first stage, the dome of the tank, and in the background you can see the vehicle assembly building. And here's a good shot of it. You can see this is the Spirit of '76. They decorated it with the American flag and the bicentennial symbol in '76. Previously, it looked like this right here. this is the way it looked in 1966
Oh, yes.
without the decorations on it. And you know, that's quite a building too. I want to take a moment to make a mention of that. When they built that building, and I'm not sure if the record still holds, but that was the biggest building in the world per volume.
It certainly was.
And they had to have special air conditioning and so forth equipment because it would actually could rain inside because it was so huge.
Think about that. Isn't that interesting?
I always thought
Absolutely.
that was very interesting too.
Well, just take a look at the cars down below
Well,
and you get an idea how big
That's
that
right.
building
That's
is.
right. And
Yeah, I remember hearing that in the spiel when we went down there and did the tour, you know?
yes, and another little interesting thing too is if you look at this picture, this Saturn V in the picture. I don't know if did you still have it frozen or
No.
It's you can see the stripes on the first stage are like my model, and this is something that I learned as I did my research about the Saturn V, and they come to find that now this one here never flew. This was a mock-up, this particular one, but they come to find they would do what they call a wet countdown test, and they would actually load the vehicle up with fuel before they'd actually flew it, and then they would take all the fuel back off again. It was what they call a countdown demonstration test. And anyway, they come to find that they had to do away with that top black stripe on the first stage because it was giving them wrong, faulty instrument readings because the extra black would attract the heat.
Of
And
course.
so they had to do away with that top stripe. And the reason why they had it on there in the first place is this would help the cameras to track the rocket when it was taking off. The more pattern you had on there, the more they could track it better. But they had to end up eliminating that in the first stage. But the rest of it pretty much remained the same as what you see in this photo.
Ah, that's truly amazing. What else do we want to look at?
All
We wanna
right,
look
now
at-
I want to talk quickly. This is the smaller Saturn. This Saturn here is
top one?
yeah, right, and then the bottom one is the model that I made of it. And what it is, Gordy, is that was used strictly for Earth orbit. In other words, to go up to meet Skylab. When they launched Skylab, the astronauts would go up in this particular rocket. And you can see that picture. It's got a picture of the H1, the 8-engine cluster. And like I said, essentially what it was a Saturn I that they used, and I used a top stage of the Saturn V, and they combined them together, and it became the Saturn 1B.
Ah.
And I don't know if Calvin had got a picture at the top, but that's that rocket garden again down at the Cape Canaveral Visitor Center. And those show various launch vehicles that they used over the years for various missions.
That's a neat place, isn't it?
It is for a fellow like me, it's a great place to go.
Even for a fellow like me.
A lot of
I
people.
haven't said, I haven't been there since maybe 1990.
Okay. Those,
Okay,
those are, I got to tip it. This is the Saturn V again. I guess we've already looked. That's my model again.
I see what
That's
you
my
mean.
model again.
I was going crooked there. I wanted to lay him down. Okay.
And then we want to look at this side. This is my last incarnation, the space shuttle itself.
Which one do we want to look at?
Well, we'll have to tip them.
Okay.
Actually, both of them.
This is the top one.
Right. And I was talking to you guys earlier about the rotating service structure,
Yeah.
which is this thing right here. You can see I was still doing some work on it. It hasn't been painted or finished yet. But anyway, that took the place of this big structure here that was used on the Saturn V, and they would use that to swap out the payloads. That's another picture I wanted to show because it shows this is the mobile service structure, the one that was just in the previous picture, the rotating service structure. But these were all to access that vehicle, to give them the 360-degree access.
Well, you have to be able to for all the reasons that may be obvious and some that aren't so.
Exactly. And last but not least, this is the Cape Canaveral Lighthouse. Still in service.
Well, I knew you wanted to show it right here.
Oh, yes.
Still in service after
Still
all
in
this time.
service.
How far back does it date?
That goes back to, about right around the time of ours, about 1860. And it was actually, they moved it. It's all cast iron, all in sections, and it was down on the beach, and they had to move it because of erosion problems and so forth. And if you look in this book here, there's a nice picture of the keeper's quarters. And, it's all been torn down, and unfortunately all that's left is the lighthouse itself, which you can see here. the keeper's quarters like over at our lighthouses. It was a beautiful complex. It really, truly was.
Isn't that neat? So that was, all in all, just going there was like, when they ask people where they want to go, they say Disney World. Well, you want to go to Cape Canaveral.
That's right, yes.
Well, when did the name change?
Well, when Kennedy was assassinated, they wanted to do something to honor him, so they changed it to the John F. Kennedy Space Center. The Kennedy Space Center, KSC is for short. And that's when the name change occurred. So I'd say they're about 64, somewhere there around there.
It's very interesting because Calvin and I spent a lot of time talking about our Plattsburgh International Airport.
Right.
With several airlines who fly to a lot of these vacation destinations in the South.
Right.
And I hope that some of the people viewing this program will now be inspired to take their little tour here and just leave the beach for a day.
Yeah.
Because if you don't go there, you're missing a great deal.
Yeah, especially if you're right down in Florida. Like you say, Disney's great and so forth, but there's something special about Cape Canaveral. It's got a rich history because it goes back to the Spanish when they named it Canaveral because of the reeds, all the reeds that grew there, and it was very treacherous waters. That's why the lighthouse ended up being built. And of course, like I say, when this was built, mankind had no idea that they were going to be someday launching, rockets from there. And what's interesting to note too is a lot of people that went down there would confuse the lighthouse for a rocket, because it would look like a rocket because of the roughly 160 some feet, so it was about the same height as a lot of them, and it was all in that general area. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of people would think that was a lighthouse, and they actually made a little movie about, it was kind of a put together type of deal where they had this guy flying that the lighthouse supposedly took off. It was just like a little gag reel
Yeah.
that they did, but it was pretty interesting. I've never actually seen it, but I've read about it and so forth.
All right, Robbie, it's time to express a little bit about what your answer might be to a naysayer who comes and says, why do we want to put more people in space? What's out there anyway? Let's spend more time investigating what we already have here, or more into oceanography or so on. Why do you think it's important for us to learn more about space?
Well, Gordy, I'm glad you asked that question because I actually have a quote in one of my books here.
I should have known. I should have known.
And I was going to see if we can pause a second, maybe.
Okay. I think that's an appropriate way. I'm
Right.
sorry, I'm dropping everything. You have things in the pages.
I'm a real squirrel here. I put too much stuff
But
in
that's
here.
an appropriate way to end this segment of our program, Robbie.
Right.
The earth is the cradle of reason, but one cannot live in the cradle forever.
Right, and so you asked a question, and I thought this is a good quote. We need to leave Earth, even though it's a great place. We need to get out there and see what else our universe has to offer. And if mankind continues to proliferate, they're going to need more space for people to live. And why not explore space and be able to produce things that we can't produce here on Earth because of the gravity and so forth. There's a lot of variables that we don't have to consider if we're on another planet or out in the confines of space. So,
And the simplest experiments that have been conducted on some of our space probes have revolutionized some of our scientific thought when you stop to think about it.
Yeah.
How do things grow? What happens in zero gravity?
That's right.
And things that most of us have never even dreamed about.
Exactly.
So to use the phrase, we're only scratching the surface,
Is very meaningful.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's very meaningful.
Yes.
So you and I, and possibly Calvin back there, but we're not sure of his opinion, would hope that we've still got some money left to probe into space as time allows. Because we have and I don't mean to interrupt you, but
No.
I'm so interested in finding out whether there is life beyond us.
Well, that's the whole thing.
And we've got radio telescopes and various arrays all over the face of this
Yeah. I believe it's
Earth.
called the SETI program, I think.
The SETI program is definitely picking up billions and billions of things from
Yeah.
outer space and trying to interpret and to see where the anomalies might be.
Right, and what it all means.
Yeah.
And you know, hey, it just seems that there's got to be something beyond us. Maybe that doesn't look like us, but there's got to be some kind of life form out there. What exactly it is, God only knows. But it just seems logical, of all the millions of galaxies and stars out there and planets, that there's got to be, you know, something beyond ourselves.
Let's just hope they don't look like me. So what's next for you? Is your collection growing all the time? I know it is in your mind.
Well, you know, like I said, I'm glad we're doing this show because it kind of revitalizes my interest in what we're talking about, and some of these things these models I never really finished completely, and so hopefully I'll, you know, over the next few years I'll get out the paintbrush and get out the glue gun or whatever and do a little bit more you know, detailing and so forth, and try to make them more finished model. So
Gee whiz, maybe you'll get inspired and you'll be able to design a time machine.
that would be the ultimate thing.
You know, what we've done today is just launched our own little video time machine here and gone back 40 years and more.
Well, yeah, you know, actually, this started, in my mind anyway, last October. Calvin and I got done Mass down at Champlain here at church, and I said to Calvin, I said, do you ever think about maybe doing a 40th anniversary for Apollo 11? And he said, no, but he says, that sounds like a half good idea anyway. And so anyway, you know, it's true because, you know, we're talking about the quadricentennial, 400 years, you know, since basically that's modern history when you think about it, you know, in the grand scheme of things. So you think about what was man doing 360 years later after Samuel D. Champlain. He was going to the moon, you know, and you know, you put that all in perspective, and that even adds more to the whole juices of things.
Who knows what worlds we'll be exploring in the future. All right, we'll pause for a moment, then we'll wrap it up. This book is significant for you, Robbie, for a good reason.
Right, because I was there for that was the last Apollo flight in 1975, the last time an Apollo, you know, mission was actually flown, and I was just very pleased to have been able to witness the actual launch, you know, down there. And like I say, this is a little booklet that just shows the what the Apollo and the Soyuz capsule looked like when they met up in space, and this was the beginning of, you know, which was very significant, is the Russians and the Americans finally, instead of fighting one another, because another thing I'll quickly point out is that when Apollo 11 took off, 3 days before, the Russians had launched Luna 15, and Luna 15 was to compete with the Apollo 11 mission, even though it was unmanned. And anyway, it turns out that, you know, there again, 40 years ago, the Russians and the Americans were having problems talking to one another, but they wanted to make darn sure that the two vehicles didn't collide out there. And it turns out that Luna 15 crashed on the moon in no less the Sea of Crises, which is kind of ironic.
There's irony for you.
And so anyway, but I just wanted to show that quickly.
And I want to show the patch because there's a picture of it right there, and it's almost like the yin and the yang, the way they've got it together, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And
this way. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I thought maybe you'd sew it on your shirt, or maybe
one of these
glue
days,
it on your chest or something.
Some darn thing, yeah. But,
I want to also show this picture. This is kind of cool.
Right. What happened was that's the gantry that was for John Glenn's Apollo, Pad 14 for his Mercury flight, and that's what they tore it down because one of the biggest problems down in Florida was the corrosion from the ocean. If they were going to keep these towers as a memento for historians in the future to see, they would have to keep them well maintained. And with the salt air and the cost involved, they decided to tear them down, unfortunately. But that's just the picture from
anybody who's ever lived
then.
near or camped or vacationed near the ocean knows that you have to protect everything because it will corrode. You'll get in a luxury apartment or condo on the ocean, and you'll find that all the casings around the sliding doors are all completely corroded.
I know.
So it's very interesting, and that is a huge factor.
Yes.
we've had a ball.
We've had a good time, and
You've got. I want you to know, folks, that Robbie wasn't quite sure he could fill an hour and a half of conversation here. He's got enough to do 17 more shows here and in his head. It is a good thing to like. The space program is a very interesting study for you.
It is, yes.
And you know a lot more than you think you know, don't you, when you start talking?
I hope, like I say, that I've been able to, inspire some of the viewers, and I'm appreciative that you guys have allowed me to share, like I say, my limited knowledge with you.
Yeah,
about the program.
we always say when we do this, we can't tell the whole story, but
No.
at least we can make it interesting enough so that maybe some of our young people will go get interested in the space program.
And pique their
You
interest.
know, I mean, Robbie wanted to be. I've been called a space cadet in my time, but you would, boy, if you could have ever got in the astronaut program.
Maybe we've been to Mars by now.
And who knows what'll happen. If you were to collect $3 or $4 million, you might be able to secure a space.
Yeah, that's about what it would take, too.
Yeah.
Some pocket change.
Robbie, thank you so much for all your interest, for all the time you spent with us, your family, the lighthouses. It's all just another little corner of this great North Country.
It is.
That's why we call this program Our Little Corner, because it's just another little segment of what we're all interested in.
That's right, and it's nice that we're able to hopefully be able to do many more shows over the years.
Yep, and I'm sure we will. And if Calvin can isolate some of this wonderful old 16 millimeter footage to put on the end of this program as we wave goodbye, that would be a great thing too. And you know how we always end our programs?
Yes, and I just want to mention one other quick thing. Tip our hat to our old friend Bob Venn. Bob was good enough to record some of the shuttle program, because I didn't have a VCR back in the early 80s, and he took some nice video footage for me, which I was able to look at on his machine, of the space shuttle.
No
when
kidding.
I was building these back in the early 80s. So like I say, just want to add a little.
His memory lingers on in so many ways, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and like I say, your legacy will hopefully continue with.
Well, if Bob hadn't done his What's Going On Here programs, so many of those programs, I'm sure I wouldn't be sitting here with you today.
Yes.
And so let's wrap it up by saying, who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.
We're going to close with a couple of video images that were re-released today as we're taping this on July 16th, 2009. This is the date that the blast-off occurred. And here's a 2-minute little montage of what happened 40 years ago when the lunar module landed.
At the foot of the ladder, the lamp footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. And then a long one. Okay, I'm going to leave that 1 foot up there and both hands down about the 4th rung up. There you go. Okay, now I think I'll do the same. For those who haven't read the plaque, we'll read the plaque that's on the front landing gear of this LAM. There's 2 hemispheres, one showing each of the 2 hemispheres of Earth. Underneath it says, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. It came in peace." I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene. That's all right, I don't mind a bit. How is the quality of the It really is. Oh, geez, that's great. Is the lighting halfway decent? Yes, indeed. They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the...
Again, these images are available at the NASA website. You just go there, and there's a whole lot of other images available. We're going to close with some very famous remarks from Neil Armstrong.
Getting back up to that first step. It's try to collapse too far, but it's adequate to get back up. Roger, we copy. Pretty good total jump. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Okay, I just checked. Getting back up to that first step. It's try to collapse too far, but it's that's one small step for